Today I have a ton of cooking I need to do, so I thought I'd bring you all along. I want to get three things done for sure, and the fourth thing I probably will not get done today. But the first thing I want to do is I want to use this rhubarb that I got out of my dad's garden and make what is called a rhubarb lunar cake. Now, I saw this on Michelle's channel, my friend Michelle, Lakeside Homestead. She makes a lunar cake every year for her family when rhubarb is in season. And my husband does not particularly like rhubarb. In fact, he won't eat it if I make like a rhubarb crisp or anything like that. He just doesn't really like it. But I thought he might like it if I make it in a cake. So I went online and I looked up rhubarb lunar cake and I found this recipe. And from everything I could find online, I think this is a Canadian recipe because every website or whatever had Canada or Canadian lunar cake or something like that. So you guys, my Canadian friends, can verify this, but I think this rhubarb lunar cake is from Canada, a Canadian recipe. So that's the first thing I want to get done. Then I need to make a loaf of my basic white bread in my Pullman pan. And then the last thing I need to do is use up these overripe bananas and make a couple of loaves of banana bread. And then the other thing I want to do, which I think is going to be a separate video because it's going to have to happen late tonight, is I have 2 boxes of marshmallow peeps, half a bag of little mini marshmallows, and half a bag of these chocolate marshmallows. These are getting stale, and these are left over from Easter. And I am going to try to dehydrate these marshmallows in my oven because I do not have a dehydrator. And since my oven is going to be very busy today, and obviously dehydrating takes a very low temperature, I think what I'm going to do is tonight, after the oven cools down, I'm going to put these in the oven on the lowest temperature I can and leave them in the oven overnight. And then I'll check them in the morning and see if they are dehydrated or if they're a melted mess of goo. I've been told by a couple of different people that it will work in the oven, but I'm one of those I'll believe it when I see it type people. So I figured, well, I might as well give it a try. And I am in the hunt for a dehydrator, so I'm going to keep my eye out for one at secondhand stores and garage sales and stuff this summer because I really would like to have a dehydrator. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I will share the recipe for the lunar cake in the description box below. And I don't know if it's exactly the same recipe that Michelle uses, but it looked good anyway, so I'm going to give it a shot. So I'll be back when I have my workspace set up for cooking. Alright, so the recipe calls for 2 cups of chopped rhubarb, and I probably have more than enough here. Whatever I don't use, I'll use for something else or stick in the freezer. And this has been washed and trimmed up, but I'll go ahead and trim it up as I go along too. So I really love rhubarb, and I'm not really sure why my husband doesn't love it. I think he might have bad memories of it from when he was a kid because he used to eat it raw, and rhubarb is incredibly sour when it's raw, and so maybe he got sick off of it or something when he was a kid. He's never really explained why he doesn't like it. He just said, "Oh, I don't like it. I used to eat it raw when I was a kid." So, I don't know. I never ate it raw when I was a kid. I always thought it was way, 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 way too sour. Okay, so I got about half of the rhubarb chopped up, and I'm to my 2-cup mark here. So I'm going to go ahead and just set this aside, and I will use this for another purpose. I kind of would like to do some rhubarb preserves or jam, and I don't know if this probably won't be enough to do that, but we'll see. So I'm going to go ahead and put this aside, and we'll move on to the next step of the process. Okay, so in this bowl you need to beat the butter, sugar, and till it's smooth, and then add an egg and the vanilla and beat it well. Now, I've said this a million times, but for my new subscribers, I have a dairy allergy, so everything I do, unless I don't plan on eating it, I have to convert into a dairy-free version of it. So instead of butter, I'm going to be using coconut oil. So it calls for a 1/2 cup of, I will just say it as the recipe calls for it, but just know I'm converting it to non-dairy products. So a 1/2 cup of softened butter. My coconut oil is kind of liquidy because it's a little warm in my kitchen today, but that's okay. So there's 1/2 cup coconut oil. So it's softened coconut oil instead of softened butter. Okay, and then to that you add, the recipe calls for 1.5 cups of granulated sugar, but I have found that for most recipes you can cut the sugar content by not half, but maybe like by 3/4, and it still turns out fine. And even though rhubarb is pretty sour, I don't mind that so much. So instead of 1.5 cups, I'm just going to put 1 cup. And I use organic flour or organic sugar, so it is kind of a caramel color. It's not pure white. So there's 1 cup of sugar. And then you just mix this till it's fairly smooth. So that's on my KitchenAid. And we'll mix that till it's smooth. And when it's smooth and ready, we will be back. Okay, that didn't take long to become smooth because the coconut oil was already pretty liquidy. So now to that you're to add 1 large egg. I am going to be using one of my duck eggs. These are from my khaki Campbell ducks, and they lay green eggs. And they're a little bit smaller than my Pekin duck eggs. Pekin duck eggs are really rather large, about the size of 2 chicken eggs. So since this recipe only called for 1 large egg, I'll use my Pekin duck egg, or khaki Campbell duck egg. So you add that to the coconut oil and sugar, and then you add the vanilla, and it's 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Now the vanilla I'm using is from Mexico. One of my really good friends went on a cruise and she brought this back for me, and it's getting low. I hope she goes on a cruise again soon. I'm just kidding, but it is really, really good at vanilla. Best vanilla I've ever had. Okay, so then you beat that until smooth. Okay, so that's smooth. Now in a separate bowl you whisk together the flour, the baking soda, and the salt. So that calls for 2 cups of flour, all-purpose flour. And then it says to reserve 1 tablespoon of flour. So I'm going to take 1 tablespoon out, just put it in this little dish and set it aside. Okay, so then to the flour you add 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, whisk that together. And the next thing you do is you need buttermilk. Well, I don't have buttermilk, and I'm not going to be using cow milk, so I'm going to be using coconut milk. And the way you make milk sour if you don't have buttermilk is you just add a little bit of lemon juice to it. Now it calls for 1 cup of buttermilk. And then to that I'm just going to dump in a little bit of lemon juice, probably a couple teaspoons. I don't really measure, I just dump it in. You let it set for a minute and that will kind of curdle it and make it into a buttermilk or a sour milk. So now what you do is you add to the mixer, alternating between the flour and the milk. Rhubarb is coated in that last tablespoon of flour. You dump it into the batter, and then you fold it in. Fold the rhubarb into the batter. And in case you're wondering, the reason why my rhubarb is not pink is because of the variety of rhubarb. You're going to need a 9x13 pan, and you can either line it with parchment or you can rub it with butter, but I just like to use cooking spray. So coat it generously with the cooking spray, and you just put the batter in the pan. And I've got my oven preheating at 350 degrees. But there's one last step you do to this before you put it in the oven. For the crunch topping, the recipe calls for 1 cup of firmly packed brown sugar. But like I said, I'm going to reduce the sugar, so I'm only going to use 3/4 of a cup. So I'm going to go ahead and dish out 3/4 of a cup of firmly packed brown sugar. This in a bowl, and then to that I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, and I'm going to make them heaping because you know how I love cinnamon. And then the last ingredient you need is 1/4 of a cup of softened butter, but mine will be softened coconut oil, 1/4 of a cup. Mix all of these ingredients together until the mixture is crumbly. So I'm going to use a fork for this. Like that. Then you sprinkle the topping evenly over the batter. And just to amp up the nutritional value a little bit in this dessert, I'm going to sprinkle on the top some ground turmeric and some ground cloves. Ground cloves are full of polyphenols and antioxidants, and so is turmeric, and it is a very good cancer fighting and cell rejuvenating agents. I like to get turmeric in our diet whenever we can, but because it dyes everything yellow, it's a little bit tricky sometimes to disguise it in my food. And the cloves will just go right wonderfully with the cinnamon. Turmeric doesn't really even have much of a flavor, so you won't even notice that at all. And the cloves just will taste really good. Okay, so now you put this in a 350-degree oven and you bake it until a toothpick comes out clean, about 45 minutes. I will check it after half an hour and see if it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and get this in the oven, get my mess all cleaned up, and then I'm going to start making my bread dough. Because it has to rise, it'll work out about perfect when this comes out of the oven. It'll be almost time to put my bread in, my sandwich bread. Oh, my bread dough recipe is super duper easy. I actually got the recipe from the Needy Homesteader, and I think she got the recipe from Noreen's Kitchen. But of course, like I said numerous times, I have to adapt this for my dairy-free version. So it's really super easy. Is you pour into a mixing bowl 1.5 cups of hot tap water. To that you add 2 tablespoons of dry milk powder, and I will be using dry coconut milk powder. Then you add 2 tablespoons of butter, but I will be using 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. And then 2 tablespoons of honey. I think they use sugar, but I found I like honey better in breads. The bread doesn't dry out as fast. Then you add 2 teaspoons of yeast, and I get my yeast at Costco in bulk. 2 teaspoons of yeast, 1 teaspoon of salt, and I use sea salt. Also I get from Costco. And then 4 cups of flour, and I use bread flour, which I also got at Costco. You can use all-purpose flour, but I just like the way the bread flour turns out. And on my machine I have my dough hook, and you just start your machine on low. You don't want to go any higher than 2 on your machine. And once the dough ball comes together into all the ingredients have combined and come together, then you set your timer for 5 minutes and you let this knead for 5 minutes. So once this has come together and has kneaded for 5 minutes, I'll bring you back and I'll show you what the dough looks like. Okay, so the dough is ready. It's a little bit slightly sticky, but that's okay. Due to humidity and whatnot, I ended up having to add an extra about 1/2 cup of flour to the dough, but I don't want it to be too stiff, so I find a dough that's a little more sticky, the final product is a little softer, a little bit softer bread. So I'm going to go ahead and scrape this out of the bowl, give this a couple of little kneads by hand just to get it into a round ball. And then back into this bowl, I'm going to squirt just a little bit, a couple tablespoons of olive oil. And I'm going to put my bread dough back in, give it a nice twist, and cover it. Now I'm covering it with parchment paper that I'm going to spray just a little bit of cooking spray on. And I'll cover the bowl, and then I'm going to set this over on top of my stove where it's warm, and let this rise for 1 hour. I didn't show you guys what I got for my birthday. My birthday is April 2nd, and this is what my husband got me for my birthday. It's an ice maker. So let me show you how it works. So it's already plugged in, and you just lift the lid and you lift out this basket where the ice collects, and you pour water in, just regular tap water. And I like to put about 4 cups at a time, because otherwise the container that I have in my freezer for the ice, that's about all it will hold. So I do about 4 cups of water at a time, and then you put the basket back in, close the lid, and then you just push the on button and it does its thing. And I have it set to make large ice cubes. Oh, you can see it moving. So it'll take about 15 minutes to do the first batch because it has to get all, you know, warmed up or whatever. But then it's pretty quick. So I'll bring it back and let you see what it looks like when there's some ice in there. Okay, so there's the little ice cubes. My kids call them ice thimbles. So there's the Rhubarb Lunar cake. It just came out of the oven. And I think it's probably called lunar cake because lunar means moon, and the top of the cake gets all bumpy and everything, just like the surface of the moon. So this just came out of the oven, so it's piping hot. But I will let you know how the family likes it, especially my husband. So the bread is risen. An hour has gone by. So it's ready to go into the pan. And the way I prep my pan, they said when I got the pan that you should not use cooking spray in it. So what I do is I just take a paper towel and get some coconut oil on it, and then I just rub the pan down. Now this is a non-stick surface, but I just want to, you know, make sure the bread comes out, and so that's what I do. And I've never had a problem with the bread coming out of the pan. So that's all you do to get the pan ready. And then to get the dough ready to go into the pan, I just dump it out, flatten it into a rectangle, and I get all the air bubbles out while I'm doing it. And that noise in the background is my ice maker still going, so just ignore that. Now I've tried making this bread where I just plop it into the pan and press it out, but it just doesn't turn out as well for me. The crumb isn't as good, and I have air bubbles, and I hate having air bubbles in my bread. So I just pop it out about that size, and then I just start on one end and roll it up. And of course it'll be longer than my pan, but that's okay. You roll it up, kind of squish it together, and I push the ends in. Then I plop it in my pan. And once it's in the pan, I just push it, press it down flat, and then, I don't know if you can see this, but I take my fingers and I tuck the ends under and then press it out into the corners. And I do that on both sides. And it just makes a really nice loaf of bread. Once it's all flattened out into the pan, you just take the lid, put it on, and then I'll set it on my stove again in that warm spot for another half hour. And I found that a half an hour is just about perfect, and you don't want to let it rise longer than a half an hour. while it's rising, you have your oven preheating to 350 degrees. As soon as a half an hour's up, you put it in the oven and you bake it for 1/2 hour, 30 minutes. So when the bread is all done and out of the oven, I'll be back and I'll show you what it looks like. Here is my Pullman pan sandwich bread and my lunar cake, my rhubarb lunar cake, and I ran out of time. I overextended myself on what I thought I could get done today, and I didn't get the banana bread done, but I can work on that maybe tomorrow or another day, and I will share my recipe with you when I get a chance to get it done. Now, like I said, tonight I do plan on trying to dehydrate those peeps in those marshmallows, and that will be in a separate video, so be watching for that. In the meantime, thanks a lot for watching, friends, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll talk to you later. Bye.